She was standing in the wings watching Irene Worth's Madame Renyevskaya, the lead, and Meryl was playing Dunyasha, the maid.
Diane Lane's story does not begin with red carpets or bright lights. It begins in movement, instability, and quiet confusion. She was born on January 22, 1965, in New York City, a place filled with dreams, but also uncertainty. Her parents separated just 13 days after she was born, and from that moment forward, Diane never experienced what most people would call a stable home. Her mother, Colleen Farrington, was a nightclub singer and model, while her father, Burton Lane, was an acting coach deeply involved in the off-Broadway theater scene. He loved art, ideas, and performance, but struggled with responsibility and money. To survive, he worked as a taxi driver, and Diane spent much of her childhood riding beside him, watching the city pass by through the windows. She did not grow up in one house. She did not have her own bedroom. Instead, she lived in residential hotels and temporary places, always ready to move again. School was inconsistent, friendships were short-lived, and routines were rare. Her father could speak passionately about literature and theater for hours, yet forget basic needs like meals or rent. Diane loved him deeply, but she also learned early that love did not always come with safety. As a child, she learned to observe more than speak, to adapt instead of complain, and to remain emotionally quiet, even when things felt overwhelming. At 6 years old, her mother left her entirely, choosing to give up custody. Diane stayed with her father, and from that point on, she lived in a world shaped by adult freedom but child neglect. At 15, feeling trapped and unsure, Diane made a reckless decision to leave New York and fly to Los Angeles with actor Christopher Atkins. It was not rebellion. It was confusion mixed with independence too early. When she returned, she paid her own rent and finished high school through correspondence classes, believing she could fully control her life, even though she was still very young. But the most painful moment came in 1981, when her mother suddenly reappeared and took Diane to Georgia without permission from her or her father. Diane felt betrayed, powerless, and invisible. She was treated like an object rather than a person with feelings or choice. After 6 weeks, her father won a legal battle and brought her back to New York, but the emotional damage stayed. Diane did not speak to her mother for 3 years. During that time in Georgia, she lived with her grandmother, a Pentecostal preacher, in a small, quiet town. Life there was simple: no theater, no fame, no noise. She repaired lawnmowers, ate canned food, and lived without a phone. That stillness, so different from her chaotic childhood, planted something important inside her. It taught her calm, patience, and balance. These early years shaped Diane Lane into someone who valued privacy, avoided attention, and protected her inner world fiercely. Long before fame arrived, she learned one harsh truth: if she did not protect herself, no one else would. Diane Lane entered the world of film not because she chased it, but because it found her. At just 13 years old, she was cast in the 1979 film A Little Romance, starring opposite the legendary Laurence Olivier. The role came after director George Roy Hill saw her perform in a stage production and sensed something rare. Diane had never made a film before, but from the moment she stepped on set, it was clear she was not an ordinary child actor. She did not perform loudly or dramatically. Instead, she acted with stillness, focus, and emotional truth. Laurence Olivier himself was deeply impressed. Rather than intimidating her, he encouraged her, treated her as an equal, and helped her feel safe in an overwhelming world. The film brought Diane immediate attention. She appeared on the cover of Time magazine as a young prodigy, and critics predicted a legendary future. Hollywood labeled her the next great American actress. She seemed destined for greatness. But fame came too fast and too young. As Diane grew older, the industry struggled to understand her. She was no longer a child, but not yet allowed to be complex or flawed. Roles became limited. Expectations became heavy, and pressure replaced joy. Films like The Outsiders and Rumblefish, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, cemented her image as graceful, reserved, and emotionally restrained. She was praised, admired, and respected, but not fully embraced. As the years passed, Diane slowly disappeared from major screens. It was not because she lacked talent. It was because Hollywood moved on. New faces arrived, trends changed, and Diane, who refused to chase attention or reshape herself, he went on, quietly stepped back. Critics assumed she had burned out or faded away. In truth, she was still there, living, growing, and enduring. When she returned years later in Unfaithful, she did so not with speeches or grand moments, but with silence. A nearly wordless scene lasting less than a minute reminded the world who she truly was. Her performance was subtle, painful, and honest. It earned her critical praise and an Academy Award nomination, but once again, no major win followed. Diane Lane became known as someone always respected, often admired, but rarely rewarded. Behind the scenes, her personal life was unraveling. She experienced 2 failed marriages, emotional disappointment, and public scrutiny. A domestic violence incident with her husband led to an arrest that shocked the public. Later, she openly admitted to infidelity, an honesty that changed how Hollywood viewed her. Unlike others, Diane did not attempt to control the narrative. She accepted the consequences quietly and stepped away from the spotlight. She did not seek sympathy. She did not demand forgiveness. She simply lived with her choices. This withdrawal was misunderstood as weakness, but it was strength. Diane Lane chose dignity over noise. While others fought to stay relevant, she chose peace. While Hollywood chased spectacle, she remained still. And in that stillness, her tragedy deepened. Not because she failed, but because the world never fully knew what to do with someone so quietly powerful. As Diane Lane entered her later years, something strange happened. She did not vanish, but she also did not return loudly. She continued working steadily, choosing roles that reflected maturity, emotional depth, and realism. Films like Under the Tuscan Sun showed her warmth, vulnerability, and inner strength. Yet even then, awards continued to pass her by. By the time she reached 60, Diane Lane had spent more than 4 decades in film without receiving a major acting award. This fact alone feels heartbreaking, not because awards define worth, but because they represent recognition. Diane Lane's tragedy is not that she failed. It is that she succeeded quietly in a world that rewards noise. She never played the Hollywood game well. She did not build scandals, chase attention, or reshape herself to fit trends. She protected her privacy fiercely, rarely shared interviews, and kept her personal life away from public consumption. She raised her daughter, lived simply, and accepted aging with grace rather than resistance. In an industry obsessed with youth, Diane allowed herself to grow older naturally. That choice, while beautiful, came at a cost. Hollywood often forgets women who age without spectacle. Yet those who truly watch her work understand something deeper. Diane Lane communicates emotion with her eyes, with silence, with stillness. She does not demand attention, she earns it. Her tragedy is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, and deeply human. She was celebrated too early, pressured too fast, misunderstood too often, and rewarded too little. Yet through it all, she never lost her essence. She never became bitter. She never blamed the world. Instead, she moved forward with calm strength, carrying her pain with dignity. Diane Lane's life reminds us that success is not always visible, and tragedy does not always come with tears. Sometimes it arrives as silence. Sometimes it lives in missed recognition, overlooked brilliance, and unspoken resilience. At 60, Diane Lane stands not as a victim, but as a symbol, a reminder that true artistry does not always receive applause, and true strength does not always ask to be seen. If you have ever paused during one of her films, caught by a look she gave or a moment she held without words, then you already understand her legacy. Diane Lane did not fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed to fully understand Diane Lane. At just 14 years old, Diane Lane was already being called the next Grace Kelly, a comparison that sounded like a dream, but slowly became a heavy weight. To the outside world, her life looked magical. She was talented, beautiful, and surrounded by famous names. Directors praised her, audiences loved her, and critics spoke about her as if she were something rare and special. Diane herself once said that being compared to Grace Kelly felt like an honor, not because of fame, but because of the kindness and warmth she received from those who believed in her. Yet behind that praise was a truth she would only understand much later. Her rise happened too fast, before she had time to grow, to make mistakes, or even to fully understand who she was. When Diane first stepped onto a movie set, she was still a child, curious and eager, trusting adults who guided her path. She did not imagine herself becoming a star. She simply loved acting, loved stories, and loved the feeling of stepping into another life. But fame does not wait for readiness. It arrives suddenly, loudly, and without asking permission. Within a short time, Diane Lane's name was everywhere. Audiences saw her as natural and honest. Someone who did not act but truly felt every emotion. That quality made her special, but it also made her exposed. When Time magazine put her on its cover under the headline, "Hollywood's Whiz Kids," the world celebrated. For Diane, however, that moment quietly closed the door on her childhood. She later said she did not know she was crossing such a big line in her life. But looking back, she realized that was the moment when being a normal girl ended. Soon after, she worked in films like Touched by Love and Six Pack, and then became a key presence in Francis Ford Coppola's films The Outsiders, Rumblefish, and The Cotton Club. These were not small projects. They were important films that placed her in the center of Hollywood's attention. By the time she was 18, Diane Lane was already a millionaire. But money did not protect her from emotional cost. Fame demanded maturity she did not yet have. She had to grow up faster than her heart allowed. She had to be calm, polite, professional, and strong, even when she felt confused or afraid. Choices were often made for her, not by her. Adults decided what roles she should play, how she should speak, and how she should appear. Some people called her a flash in the pan, as if her early success meant she would disappear just as quickly. Diane felt misunderstood. She was not shallow or careless. She was simply young, sensitive, and emotionally older than her years. That sensitivity made adults uncomfortable. People often fear young people who feel deeply, because deep feelings cannot be controlled. Diane carried that same emotional intelligence into her early roles, especially in A Little Romance. Her characters were thoughtful, gentle, and aware of others' feelings. She adjusted herself to make people comfortable, just as she did in real life. This quality brought her success, but it also left her unprotected. Hollywood is not kind to vulnerability. It demands perfection and punishes mistakes, especially from young women. Diane later admitted that some scenes from her early work made her uncomfortable, not because she acted poorly, but because she had not yet learned to trust her own voice. She acted on impulse, guided by emotion, and when she cried, people dismissed it as drama rather than truth. One moment from that time stayed with her forever. A farewell scene with Laurence Olivier. When she hugged him, she did not cry for the camera. She cried because she felt real gratitude. That moment showed who Diane Lane truly was at her core. Someone sincere, open, and deeply human. But sincerity alone cannot protect a child in the spotlight. Fame continued to grow, and with it came pressure, expectations, and silent losses that no magazine cover could ever show. As Diane Lane's fame grew, the world around her began to change in ways she could not control. She was still a teenager, still learning who she was, but the public had already decided who they wanted her to be. Because of her strong on-screen chemistry with co-stars like Matt Dillon, Michael Pare, and Richard Gere, rumors followed her everywhere. A single look in a film was enough for headlines to claim real-life romance. The press did not see her as a young actress playing roles. They saw her as a story they could sell. These rumors never stopped, and for someone so young, they created confusion and emotional distance. While most teenagers were focused on school, friends, and first loves, Diane had to learn how it felt to be watched, judged, and discussed by strangers. She once explained that playing someone's lover on screen did not mean she loved them in real life. But many people refused to understand that difference. Over time, this misunderstanding slowly pushed her away from her audience. She became known more as Hollywood's dream girl than as an artist with depth. That image was dangerous because it erased her complexity. Every decision she made became a topic of discussion. How she spoke, how she lived, and which roles she accepted were all analyzed and criticized. The line between Diane Lane, the person, and Diane Lane, the character, disappeared. She began to feel as though she no longer belongs to herself. Fame can give many things, but it can also take away privacy, safety, and identity. Diane realized that if she continued this way, she would lose the part of herself that made her special in the first place. Slowly, she made a difficult choice. She stepped back. She began turning down roles that repeated the same image. She avoided the press, not because she was arrogant, but because she needed silence to breathe. This was not a career plan or a publicity move.